Chapter 48. Treadon Nelson. Ellie's head lay against his shoulder, her eyes closed, her breathing evening out the longer she was away from the black hematite. Treadon kept his arm around her shoulder, resisting the urge to touch her face, to trace her perfect lips. She was safe. That was all he wanted. She'd made her feelings clear, and he would respect that. Abigail drove the Pontiac home in record time, flinching each time a sharp turn made Gabe groan. Gabe sat in the front seat, a hand over his stomach, his head against the window. He looked like he'd fought his way through hell and back. When Abigail pulled into the driveway and put the car in park, Ellie's eyes finally opened. She saw him. "You came." "Of course." She sat up, her cheeks coloring as her hand paused against his chest. "Even after what I said about never being able to choose you?" Treadon dropped his eyes. "Yes, I had to know you were safe. I was going to find your guardian so they could help you. Finding you was worth letting you go." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the necklace by the chain. She took it from his fingers. He pulled the journal out next and held it out to her. Ellie reached for it, but stopped as she caught sight of his arm. "What happened?" "Dog bite. I'll be okay." Abigail looked over the back seat and gasped. "Why didn't you tell me you were bit? The Fenris have poisoned fangs. Most ordinaries would be dead already." Treadon felt a little dizzy. He pulled his sleeve up and saw that the poison almost reached his armpit. "You'll have to learn to take care of yourself without me." Ellie stayed calm. Despite her drained color and her forearm burns barely starting to heal, she reached for his arm and touched her finger to the wound. Treadon felt the cool pulse of her healing touch. He saw the extra drain on her and wanted to pull away, but she pressed his back against the door. Her grip was firm and determined. He never wanted her to let go. He felt the poison drain, and the hole in his arm closed. Ellie sat back, closing her eyes for a moment as she squeezed the amulet. "I'm glad you found my journal. It helped me ask the right questions." "Did you read the whole thing?" She hadn't put her hand out to accept the journal. "No, I only got to the part about how the amulet leads your guardian to you." Ellie pushed the journal back toward him. "I want you to finish reading, so that you understand." She opened the door and got out of the car. Rachel studied her hands beside him. He just disappeared, without saying anything. Why would he leave? They'd all heard the roar of Gabe's motorcycle engine as Jaren drove away. "Where would he go?" Gabe asked. "He probably needs some time to process. Alone." Rachel watched out the window, her eyebrows pulled down, sorrow tugging at the corner of her mouth. Why does he have to try to be so strong? He knows he can ask for help. He knows I would do anything for him. Treadon put a hand on Rachel's shoulder. He knows, and that's what gives him strength. Rachel blinked against the tears threatening to fall. "Treadon, help me with Gabe." Abigail had walked around the car and was trying to get Gabe out of the passenger seat. Treadon climbed out of the car. Ellie stood at the end of the driveway, looking up at a full moon, the stars nearly invisible. Here, Treadon pulled one of Gabe's arms over his shoulder and helped lift him out of the car. "Are you coming in?" he called to Ellie. "I make a mean grilled cheese." She nodded, following them through the front door. He helped lay Gabe on the futon in the office, and then Abigail shoved him out, shutting the door in his face. He turned and saw Rachel and Ellie staring at him. "Just go in," Rachel said. "They're so used to keeping you out, they don't know how to invite you in. Show them you're serious. We'll make the sandwiches." The door handle was locked, but it was just a door. He used to accept locks and rules and secrets, ignore them so he could pretend life was great, focus on football and normal life without facing things bigger than he was. He didn't want that anymore. He wanted to face things as they were, not as he wanted them to be. He grabbed the handle with both hands and twisted with a determined jerk. The mechanism inside snapped, and the door opened. Gabe sat on the futon against the far wall. His torso was bare above the waist. Abigail sat next to him with a knife and tweezers. Abigail jumped as the door swung open. Gabe looked up. "Took you long enough." "What happened?" Treadon asked. "A hematite shard broke off in Gabe's stomach. It's sucking the life energy from his body and preventing him from healing. I don't know how he has any strength left." Abigail's voice shook. The cut on her shoulder was still bleeding. Treadon leaned forward and placed his hand over her shaking fist. "Let me help. You should go see Ellie and let her heal you." "I'll help Gabe." "I'm all right." Abigail shook her head. "Let me help," Treadon said. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." Abigail dropped her head like she'd been handed a gift she'd never expected to receive. She was afraid, but wanted this with every ounce of her soul. "Let him help." Gabe's voice was rough and low. "You've done enough for today." Treadon thought Gabe would reach up and touch her cheek, lift her gaze, but he just gripped his own knees tighter. "You were amazing. I didn't realize how good you'd gotten with the maces." Abigail nodded. "I've had to work out a lot of anger over the years." She slapped him a little harder than necessary on his injured shoulder, and then stood up and left the room. Gabe flinched. "I think she's mad." "You deserve it." The slight smile on Gabe's lips pulled at Treadon's heart, with the deep sorrow and gratitude mixed on the stoic man's face, but it was wiped away as quickly as it appeared, with a grimace of pain. "Tell me what to do," Treadon said. "Cut the incision," Gabe said. "Pull the piece of shard out." Treadon hoped he didn't have anything left in his stomach after throwing up earlier. He swallowed hard and poked uncertainly at the small black hole in Gabe's stomach. The muscles were rock hard, which made it easier to press the knife against Gabe's skin. He hesitated. Confidence is the best way to overcome doubt. Despite the exhaustion in his voice, Treadon could hear a note of teasing. "I don't need cheesy fortune cookie quotes right now." He set the knife against Gabe's skin, but his hand shook. He took a deep breath to calm himself. "Press harder, like you mean it." Treadon clenched his teeth together and pressed the knife down. The skin split, and the cut filled with blood. He grabbed the tweezers and a rag Abigail left behind. He pressed the rag into the wound and then pulled back. Using instincts he didn't know he had, he shoved the tweezers in, seeing a dot of black when he pulled the rag away. He felt the tweezers hit something hard, and he squeezed, tugged. The piece of hematite shard came free. It was small, the tip of a sliver, but the effect on Gabe was immediate. His color returned. The wound started to stitch itself back together. Gabe didn't even wait for the wound to close. He stood up and pulled his dirty shirt back over his head. "I need to talk to all of you in the kitchen." Treadon leaned against the back of the futon. His legs felt like rubber. His hands shook. Black stains covered his fingers from shoving the dagger into Xander's chest. It was all so much. Too much. He could feel the anxiety tightening around him. Ellie was safe. His family was home. Just when he should be feeling better, his body was rebelling against him. He took a deep breath and shoved the tension deep inside. He felt like he was pressing a jack-in-the-box spring into too small of a box. He followed Gabe into the kitchen and sat at the table. There was a pile of grilled cheese sandwiches in the middle of the table, but Treadon couldn't get himself to unfold his arms from across his chest. Ellie sat down next to him and placed a hand on his arm. It helped. His muscles relaxed just enough for him to reach out and grab a sandwich cut in a triangle half. He nibbled on the end. Rachel, Abigail, and Gabe sat down as well, a circle of faces looking at each other. "What happened after I left?" Gabe asked. "Jaren and I ran up the stairs and found Xander pulling a dagger from Ellie's arm." Treadon couldn't swallow the small bite of sandwich he'd taken. "The white dagger." Ellie nodded. "You're the descendant of Adiona. You have the twin daggers written into your DNA." Gabe's hands were pressed flat to the table, like he was holding it down in case gravity reversed itself. "The Triune wanted the daggers, and somehow they knew you were the key." Ellie looked down at her hands. "I always thought it was just a story my mom used to tell me, to get me to go to sleep. I started to realize that she was telling me history, but I never thought I had the daggers." "Twin daggers?" Rachel asked. "I only saw one, the white one that killed Provis." Rachel didn't meet Treadon's eyes when she said it. "Xander was interrupted," said Gabe. "There's still the black dagger in her, the one the Triune really wants. It has the power to tear the descendants apart so that their souls never die, but they're trapped in limbo, like his own demons, living forever in a half-existence." "That's awful." Rachel reached for Ellie, offering comfort as they took each other's hands across the table. "What do we do now?" Ellie asked. "We keep you safe, at all costs," Gabe said. "What about finding her guardian?" Treadon asked. "Maybe that will help keep her safe?" Gabe shook his head. "I have a place I can take her. She'll be protected there." "More hiding." Ellie whispered the words. "There are other Unguarded there. You won't be alone." Ellie and Rachel moved to the couch. Abigail cleared the table, and Gabe left through the front door. Without Ellie's touch, Treadon's panic rose to a whole new level. He slipped to his own room and curled up on his bed, his hand gripped around the journal. He couldn't close his eyes, and he couldn't get his mind to stop swirling. He opened the book and stared at her handwriting. He found the place he'd left off and read. He wasn't sure when the words blurred into nightmare, but the dream blossomed out of the darkness of Ellie's story. The boy, the blood, the park. Treadon sat on a swing, the chains creaking as he rocked back and forth. It was night, the park deserted, the wind helping leaves play around the swing's poles. A broken teeter-totter lay half buried in the bark of the playground area. Across the road from the park was a thick forest with tall trees that swayed, branches blocking the moon. He didn't feel afraid. Despite having the small feet of a child instead of a towering athlete, he was waiting for something. He wouldn't be alone for long. He heard the sobs of another child coming from the forest, from across the road. He wanted to help, wanted to be a hero, like another person he knew. He wanted to be a hero, like Gabe. The crying pulled at his heart, and despite his instructions to stay put, to not wander, Treadon moved toward the road, away from the park, the forest getting closer. He thought he could see the other child, curled against a tree. He stepped onto the road, focused on the form, a girl, her dark hair forming a silhouette against the lighter bark of the tree. The car came out of nowhere, going way too fast for a twisty two-lane road. He looked down to see his sneakers centered perfectly on the solid double lines. He looked up into the two bright lights and opened his mouth. He didn't even have time to scream. The dream shifted. The lights changed. They were no longer white headlights. They turned brown, shifting shapes, a pupil forming in the middle, and long eyelashes framing the beautiful eyes. Ellie's eyes sparkled with humor as he felt the crushing pain shoving all the air from his lungs.